Welcome back, guys. Another Confidently Flawed podcast episode. Danny here. I'm with Brooke, and actually, we have a guest on today. Somebody that's actually been on the podcast It's been a couple years now. Uh, Brian was with us a few years ago, and it was an incredible conversation. We had a lot of good feedback from it. Brian and I just kind of reconnected. We actually originally met through a mutual friend that we know, and we kind of touched base. Both of us had very similar interests, very similar philosophies when it comes to health and fitness and all that. So I talking with Brian, I was like, you know what, let's get you back on the podcast, because we were talking about connecting on some other things as well. So Brian, I think before we dive into it, I know you have a lot of passions. You're very knowledgeable on a lot of different topics. We were talking about coming in because I think it's something that a lot of people are dealing with right now, like the uncertainty of the economy, like things going on in the world, everything there. Like there's a lot of stress going on. So we wanted to bring Brian in and just kind of talk a little bit about eliminating stress. And I know you kind of recently, you're in a different situation than you were when we last met, and you kind of like completely transitioned your career path, what you were on, what your mission was in life. And I'm sure that came with a lot of stress. So you probably got a lot of back end, experience in this topic. So Brian, before we kind of dive into the stress things, like I'd love to kind of just bring you back on, tell the people listening a little bit about you, kind of what you've transitioned to, kind of your little backstory here recently, and then we'll kind of dive in from there.
Sure. So I've been in the surf industry for most of my life, for over 30 years. And I've taught extreme water sports for close to 25 years. I've competed in extreme water sports for all of my life. And I turned it into a career. I was very fortunate. I was very blessed. I loved what I did. And I went through a big transformation about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and really knew I felt a deeper purpose and a deeper calling to helping people, and in a much, well, deeper level, so to speak. So, I was helping people. I was I felt like, interesting enough, I felt like a drug dealer. So I was really giving people this fix of these adrenaline driven sports. And what I've noticed was they were using it as their external source of happiness. So if they weren't able to get out on the water and kiteboard or windsurf or paddleboard or surf or whatever it was, they'd come in, they'd be depressed, they'd be sad. Oh, I haven't gotten on the water. And I myself went through the same thing. I realized that all of these sports that I was doing was really just something that I was using as a pleasure, an external pleasure. And when I didn't have it, when I didn't get out, and honestly, when I was younger, I missed part of Thanksgiving dinner because I had to go out and windsurf. And I always keep reminding myself of these stories because it brings me back to who I was at one point and the transition that I made in my life. So long story short, I knew that wasn't my true purpose. And I don't know if I told this on the show before, is that I almost lost my life 3 times. And this is in water sports. So there's moments where I thought, this is it, this is the last breath I'm going to take. And it really changed my perspective on life and also on how each day is a gift. And I knew that, yeah, that wasn't my passion. And I knew that I wanted to help people again, much deeper. And I would have people come in and we'd be talking about their personal life, and then they weren't even buying gear. So I was like, all right, I think this is a good time to transition. And I think, to the point too, is that when you're in business and people are coming in and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with this person, that's a time to make that shift. That's a time to get out of what you're doing. And yeah, I told my friends and they were like, wow, like, I can't believe you're doing this. I mean, it was a business that kept me very comfortable, and but there was no growth toward it as well. So it was really hard to really scale a business that's seasonal. And I just realized, again, this wasn't my purpose. And so I made the switch. I told all my friends. They thought I was crazy. I liquidated the shop, and I went full into life coaching, transformational coaching, and also mental performance coaching, because really all change starts in the mind. It's a trickle down effect. And so I was fortunate, though, guys, to like, I had that under my belt with learning how to deal with stress and emotions, And so it was a little bit easier to transition. Not to say it wasn't hard. It was. I mean, your identity is tied to what you do. So if Danny or Brooke, if you went off and did a completely different career, you kind of lose that identity a little bit. And that's what happened with myself. And I knew that was going to happen. It didn't happen for the first couple of weeks, and then it hit me hard one day. I was like, oh man. So it's amazing. But I was very blessed and fortunate to do a lot of work prior to that, to help me through this. And it still hasn't been an easy road, but it's again where my passion lies. And personally, I suffered most of my life, and I hate to see people suffer. And we do suffer needlessly. We suffer more in imagination than reality. And this is the things that I want to help people with. And it's really guiding them to be the best version of themselves, but to understand themselves, to know thyself. And that's the work I do. So
That's awesome, Brian. And props to you first. Just obviously you're making an impact in the community. And it's not that you weren't with the other things that you're doing, but like you had a realization, you realize, like you said, you were suffering, you weren't happy, and you made that shift. Like how many people go through their whole life
mm,
miserable because it's more comfortable, the uncomfortableness of the thing that they don't like doing, more so than the change and the unknown, right? And so my hat's off to you for taking that initiative and doing that. And you're doing something now that's making a big impact in the people around you and your community and everything there. So I think that's a super valuable lesson that like sometimes the grass is greener on the other side, with especially with stuff like this. And I think that's pretty incredible to hear that when it comes to, sorry guys. Um, yeah, so I think Brian, that's I love the story. I love the back end story. Like you mentioned it was difficult at times, change, unknown, not sure where to go. What are a lot of people deal with that kind of stuff, right? And maybe it's not shifting careers, maybe it's, a relationship that maybe they should or shouldn't be in, or it's a decision that they just sit on for years and years and years. Like you kind of hinted at it, like the stress is like a lot of times just like the imagination of things. Like, what are some of the things that you've worked with people that you see on a consistent basis of like stress, what's causing the stress, and maybe even start to like, what are some things that people listening can do to eliminate some of that stress, or even like what is that stress translating into their life?
sure. A big part of this is really knowing the nature of your mind. And that's the first step, is really being more conscious of your thoughts, of your emotions, where those are coming from, because we're typically ruled by our mind. We are driven all over the place. And in an average day, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts. And those thoughts are the same thoughts throughout our days. And the majority of them are negative. And those negative thoughts are really, I'm not going to say they're our fault, but they've been embedded in us throughout our lifetime, right? The traumas that we went through, the things that we dealt with, in life. And we tend to carry those with us and we don't recognize that. And the biggest thing, and what I help really people with, is eliminating, well, one is fear, and you kind of hit on it, Danny, is that you said that most people are afraid to step out into the unknown, and it's something where people think about, they think of worst case scenarios. We're the best storytellers. We write novels and short stories that never come true, right? Like that's what we do. And so, I mean, how many times have you thought of, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and nine times out of 10, it doesn't. So now we're suffering again with something that we think may happen. And a lot of that is the expectations we have in life. Like we expect things to go a certain way. We expect people to do a certain thing, say a certain thing. And if they don't, then we get very disappointed. There's a quote, is expectations are premeditative resentments, and they really are. And we always have these expectations. So, for me, the first step is really helping people know the nature of their mind and to step back and to be observer of your thoughts. Because with all these thoughts that we have, they're bouncing around. We have to realize that what are the the negative thoughts that are coming in? What are those limited beliefs that keep coming in? And those are ingrained. They're called neural pathways. And when like say, and I'll use an example of driving. When we all first drove, right? Like it was tough. We had to think of everything, right? We had to think of the road, the blinker, the cars next to us. So like we were engaged. And then that became a subconscious. It obviously got hard. It got driven into our subconscious, where we really have to think about it. And that's called a neural pathway. So it's a connection in your brain. And then that neural pathway is ingrained. So it's easy. We don't have to think about it. Now we're eating and putting on makeup and texting while we're driving now, unfortunately. So that's an ingrained neural pathway. Now, once you start noticing those thoughts that come up, that arise, that are limited, like I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, you have to be able to step back and hold space for that. It means, and I'll put it in a better way, because I love quotes, and I work on quotes a lot. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Okay, he wrote a most amazing book, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Um, he has this quote, and it says, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and within that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom." So between stimulus and response, so between what somebody says to us and our typical reaction, right? Because that's what we do, we react. We don't respond, we react. So if we have, and I'll use an example of that, somebody says something negative to us, what do we usually do? We usually backlash, and we haven't ingrained to be like, fight them back. Let's get them back. Let's talk, say, and we always end up saying something that we regret, don't we? But if you hold space, if you just take a second to take a breath, maybe 5 seconds, and you choose to respond with your heart instead of your mind, because the mind is the ego, wanting to be right all the time, wanting to need something wrong, and really jump back at somebody. And if we just take that space and hold that space, we can choose a different response that's going to empower us instead of limit us. Do you see what I'm saying? So much is really the mind itself, is knowing the nature of your mind and knowing those negative thoughts. So back to the neural pathways, if I were to see a negative thought, and this has happened, I've done this a lot of times, where this thought would come in, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to give it space. And then I'm going to put a different quotation into it. So say I say I'm not good enough. Well, I'm working on myself. I'm getting better every day. So I'm reframing it, but I'm actually starting a new neural pathway instead of that negative one that comes in, that's ingrained of what we say to ourselves. Now I'm reframing it and saying, no, I'm getting better at this. I'm getting smarter. And then when you use those positive affirmations, they start a new neural pathway. And then those negative thoughts become less and less and less, and those positive thoughts become more and more and more. So it's quite amazing how the brain works, is that we're so inundated with the things that we went through in the past and all the traumas, and how we choose to respond to situations, whether it's, what somebody says, or somebody cuts us off on the freeway or whatever. We're ingrained to be like, let's honk at this person, yet let's yell at this person, let's try to get them back in a negative manner. But when we start to have that pause between that stimulus and response, when we make that space and we take a breath, we can choose a much different response. It's gonna really empower you, and it's gonna change your life. It really is. I apologize. I go off on rants. So that was your original question.
No, you're absolutely allowed to. That's why you're here. You're here to
Yeah.
share whatever you want to share. But no, I was just gonna say I love that. I think so. I feel like all of us know the concept and idea of, when someone responds, don't react. Like try to take a breath, don't, but thinking of it in the sense for yourself, like don't, when your mind has those negative thoughts, like try to stop, take a breath, hold space. Like I love that. I've never really thought of it in that regard. So thank you for sharing that, because that is so true. I mean, the mind is everything, and it's 60 to 70,000 thoughts in a day, and most of them are negative. Like, could you, like, that's probably a huge reason why we were all stressed, which was kind of what Danny's question was in the regards of like, working with stress and how you're able to help people through stress. But, we are all just so stressed today. And I think just the way the world is, like, everyone is so hard on themselves because they're judging. They're on social media judging themselves on everyone that they see. They're judging themselves according to the people that are working out to them next in the gym. They're judging someone according to, their marriage. But at the end of the day, you don't really fully know what's actually going inside someone. So let's focus inward versus outward. And I think one of the best places, like you shared, is to hold space for our own thoughts and try to turn them positive. So I love you. I love that you shared that. So thank you for sharing that. So one of the questions though Danny had was in regards to stress. So and how you're able to really help people with stress. So could you kind of share with us a little bit of more information on that?
Yeah, so different modalities. I mean, meditation is a big practice that I do, and it's meditation itself has been studied for over the last 50 years scientifically, and they're actually putting wires on monks and they're scanning their brains. The Obviously there's a reason why meditation has been around in history for the last 4 or 5 thousand years. That is what I said earlier, is to know thyself. So using meditation techniques, because what it does is it gets you into the present moment. The reason we stress is that we're thinking of a future that has not happened. That's anxiety and that's stress. Or we're thinking of something that happened in the past that we cannot change. So now we're going back to that. That's where depression happens and anxiety happens and stress, because we're thinking of a future that hasn't happened. Um, it is a choice, and I really, people may backlash on me, but it is a choice to be stressed. We can reframe things and we can understand that, okay, one, what is in our control? Okay, so if we get stressed out at somebody that says something to us that, we can't control, well, then we're letting them take our power. We're letting them bring up emotions that are really from past experiences, right? It could be an ex-boyfriend, it could be whatever. But we're letting them take our power. So by doing that and by reframing and being like, okay, wait a minute, I have a choice. This person, what they're saying to me is really more about them. It has nothing to do with me. And is it in my control? Can I control what they say? No. So, I love philosophy. Stoic philosophy really talks about what is in your control and what is not. And that's the focus of control. Again, we can't control the weather. We can't control what's happening in Congress. We can't, these are things that we are just out of our control, but yet we stress about it. Like, and really this was interesting. So a good friend of mine, really dear friend of mine, his daughter was distraught because of who was in presidency. And she's like, the world's going to go to hell. Now she's already making up a scenario in her head and she's depressed. It's like, well, you can't change that. It's like, what can you do about this? So she's creating her own hell. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, but it's the true reality. She's creating something that she cannot control. It's completely out of her control. And now she's like, the world's going to hell, everything's going to be bad. So she's thinking of worst case scenarios. And that's how our brain is designed, right? To look out for the bad. It's ingrained in us. That's in our DNA. And our brain wasn't made to make us happy. It was just made to protect us. So now we have to figure out, okay, now how can we change that? How can we change that itself? So it's really knowing, again, the stress itself is knowing what's in your control. It's using techniques like meditation to become more aware, and awareness is key. So I use this analogy. If you walk into a dark room in your house, in somebody else's house, and you're bumping into furniture and chairs, you can't see anything. When you turn on the light, that's the light of awareness. That's how you start to actually see, oh, here's a chair. So here's this negative thought. Here's this other thought. Here's this thing that's been limiting me because I keep telling myself this. So now that's awareness. Awareness is the key to any change. So I help people really gain more awareness through techniques like meditation, breath work, yoga. These are all techniques that can help us become more aware and be more centered, because we're always going, aren't we? We're going, 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 going. I mean, you heard the term where, you know, we're human. We're not human doings. We're human beings, right? We're being in the moment. And we don't give ourselves that chance because we're so go, 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 go. And our mind is going from one thought to the next thought to the next thought. We're never in this moment. Now, right now, when I'm speaking to you, a lot of the times when we're speaking to somebody or somebody's speaking to us, we're already thinking of the next thing we're going to say. And that's normal, right? But to really engage with somebody, this is a podcast, so this is completely different. But let's say Brooke, you're talking to me. When you're talking to me, I'm going to be there. I'm not thinking of the next thing I'm going to say. I want to let your words resonate into me. So I'm completely there. Now, if Brooke's talking and I'm all thinking, okay, well, now I'm going to say this next, I'm going to say this next, I can't focus on Brooke. I can't be there for her. And you guys know when somebody's paying attention to you or not when you're in conversation. It's quite obvious. So that's being in the moment. That's holding space for somebody. That's being present. And stress is really caused by, again, focusing on something that hasn't happened, focusing on a past that hasn't happened. When you look at the least stressful people in the world, they meditate, they do breath work. Gratitude, which is studied, is absolutely huge. I work with my clients with this. I think of every morning before I step out of bed, 3 things I'm grateful for. Because when we start our day with gratitude, with something that we're happy about, instead, most people are start the day with their phones, with the job they don't want to go to, with maybe a spouse they're arguing with, or just looking on the phone and comparing themselves to everybody else, like you said earlier, comparison's the thief of joy. So when we start our day with all those things, what we focus on expands. So when we see all the negative, or thinking of all the negatives in our day that we have to deal with, we're going to see the negatives. That's how our brain works. We start with gratitude, 3 things we're grateful for. When we take a breath and maybe do like a 1-minute meditation, guided meditation, or even just something that we can do internally. These are things that I teach. Now you're starting your day consciously, and then you set an intention for the day. I am going to be less stressed. I am going to be more focused, and you kind of give these affirmations of what you want to do and accomplish, because again, that's starting a new neural network. It's starting a new connection. So really, it starts with awareness with the mind, and then obviously, we can get into nutrition, how much that affects, obviously everything, exercise. I have these 6 pillars, which is mindset, nutrition, constantly learning, engaging the brain, exercise, of course, which is huge, sleep, which is really big, and recovery. These are things that are really important for us. So when we start to integrate this into our lives, I mean, my life completely changed. I'm a completely different person than I was 20 years ago. When people have met me, they're like, or knew me from back in the day, they're like, yeah, you're completely different. You're more focused, you're calmer. And still things will affect me, but they won't last as long. Like somebody says something to me, I'm not going to carry that throughout the day, right? Because we have to remember what that person says to get angry again, don't we? So let's say, Brooke, you had a fight with your husband like on Sunday, and then on Monday at 3 o'clock, you're like, all right, what did my husband say to me yesterday at 12 o'clock? Oh, I'm going to get angry again, right? That's what we do, right? That's how our minds work. So we're just going back to something we can't change. So again, that's where awareness, that's where conscious, being more conscious. And when you start to do that, again, you'll still have to deal with problems in your life, but it becomes so much easier and so much simpler. And you're able to let go of the things instead of carrying them with you. And that's really, in a nutshell, really our life is that we carry these things, we carry our past, we think about, again, a future that has not happened yet, and we don't have time to be here in this moment. Like where we're at now, we're talking to each other, we're here in this moment. And again, back to when you're talking to somebody, that you're actually there for them. And that's holding space, and that's huge. People appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and it's like your mind can only, even though we think we can multitask, like our mind can still only focus on one thing at a time. So like if I'm focusing on Brian, if I'm focusing on Brooke, I can't be sitting here sulking about depression or anxiety or things going on that I can't control, right? So I think that's a great, understanding. And I think, Brian, as you're talking through this, there's like 2 things that I think really stood out to me, especially for somebody that, like, this is a new concept for, right? They're not aware of how the mind works and the neural pathways and everything there if you're finding you're stressed, or if you're finding you're stuck, or if you're finding you're full of anxiety or depression or what have you, I think it really comes down to, like, if you can do one thing from all the stuff Ryan's talking about, is just become more aware. Watch your thoughts, whether through meditation or not, of like almost like it's a movie, right? Like they're not yours. You're just paying, you're just watching it like a movie's going by, and just become aware, and you'll probably find two things. You're either going to find that they're silly and dumb, that it really doesn't make sense, or you're going to find reoccurring things that you keep thinking about, or like reoccurring situations, even if it's in different scenarios, keep happening, right? Like I keep worrying about the same type of thing, even if it's in different situations, right? So I think becoming aware, practicing meditation, practicing breath work, practicing prayer, right? Or whatever it is to you, of like, how can you just take a step back and just be an observer and not actually just going through everything, right? And I think that's the most important thing that people can at least start to do, and you'll start to see a shift there. And then I think the second piece to that, that I really loved of what you said, Brian, is the focus thing. The, like, what you focus on expands. So it's like, become aware of what you're focusing on and
Mhm.
thinking about, and then focus on something different, right? You mentioned, like, say a different quotation of like, I'm not good enough to, I'm working on myself, right? And you're changing your focus, and really, like, that's ultimately what it's coming down to, right? Is become aware of where your focus is, change where your focus is, right? What you focus on expands. So if you want a different scenario, if you want a different ideal state for your life, start to focus on something different. Better yet, start to focus on what that version of yourself would do, act, be like, right? And then start to do that. Start to act as if, almost fake it till you make it, right? Like, and I think people would see a world of difference in their everyday life, in their everyday stress. And like you said, stuff's still going to happen. It's not going to, like, it's not that stress is going to go away, but how you respond to it is going to be much different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, man. Well said. And you said something that I really love, is that to be the person. Okay. So George Bernard Shaw once said, you don't find yourself, you create yourself. You create the person you want to be. And when I heard that, that was the start of my transformation. I'm like, okay, well, who does Brian want to be? I want to be the best version of myself. I want to be less stressed. I want to be more present. I want to be more loving. I want to be more accepting, less judgmental, all these things. So, like, that's who I envision myself to be. Now, you can do this in a space of meditation where you're doing it's kind of a manifestation, so to speak. So what you're doing is you're actually feeling into your heart. So I have people do this. I have them think of one thing that they're grateful for in their life. So an amazing thing. So think of that moment, right? And what you want to do is you want to step into that moment. This is a part of a visualization exercise as well. So you step into that moment and you feel into your heart that moment that happened. You're seeing what you saw, hearing what you heard, being in that moment. And then when you feel into that with your heart, and you can actually feel it, you can feel it resonating in your heart, then you're going to manifest and think about the person you want to be. Okay, I want to be more loving. I want to be, less stressful. I want to be more present with my coworkers or my family or my mom or whatever that is. So that's something that we can create. And when you're doing that, the mind doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. So when we're envisioning who we want to be, that's now starting to get instilled into those neural pathways. You're starting to become the person you want to be, but you have to feel the emotion of it first, right? Emotion is the biggest key. So I love that you said that, because that's exactly how you make that difference in or how you want to change the person that you want to be. Oh.
Well, and you think of it in both sides, right? When you can have those positive conversations with your mind, and let your mind know, this is who I want to be, this is how I want to act, versus the other way when you're constantly telling your mind, like when you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror and you're telling yourself, oh, I'm ugly, oh, I'm fat, oh, I'm broke, oh my gosh, I'm miserable. You start to think that way because, like you said, your mind, and I didn't realize that your mind doesn't know the difference between reality body and what you tell it. So, you know, if you're sitting here constantly having these negative thoughts, like your mind is going to think that. So, you know, trying to rewire and just sit in that space of trying to, you know, envision who you want to be and where you want to be. I mean, the mind work is amazing. It really, really, truly is. And, you know, I just know from so much experience and it, you know, we have a kind of similar past. You know, I was in action sports as well with snowboarding. So a
Right.
little bit
Yeah.
opposite. So you know, a lot of what you were saying at the very beginning really resonated with me. And I, you know, I worked with you know, a coach who specifically helped with my mind and, you know, the positive thoughts, it really, really does make a difference. And so all of this, I think is, you know, I feel like we could just keep going and going on this subject, but I have so many other questions on. I love even your pillars. You really really briefly went into the pillars. I would love to even go deeper into that, but
That's what I was thinking, Brooke. Like, I actually had the same thought. Like, what if we bring Brian back on for another episode and kind of dive into those pillars, or at least an overview of those, so like people maybe know, like, it's kind of like you know, you see like the wheel of life, and you know what I mean, like those kind of things of like, what are the things that like maybe find where you're unbalanced in,
yeah.
right? And maybe what should you be looking at so that like implementing the awareness and focus and the mindset stuff will just become that much easier, almost like drivers for it. Would you say that's kind of how it is, Brian? Maybe we'll bring you on for another episode and we can kind of dive deeper into that.
Yeah, I'd love that. And I like to use a quote by Jim Rohn is success leaves clues. What are the most successful people doing? Well, they're working on their mindset, they're working on their nutrition, their exercise, their connections with people. Yeah, that's so important, just having those connections. And then of course, sleep and always learning and engaging the brain, right? So one quick story, I completely changed my brain. I grew up with head injuries. I don't know if I said this in the past podcasts that we did, but I grew up with head injuries, many concussions through sports, and I had difficulties learning. I had emotional problems, behavioral problems. I did apologize to my parents when I realized all this, but because I put them through a lot of hell. And by doing these pillars, by incorporating these pillars into my life, it's if you've heard, I'm sure you've heard the term neuroplasticity or neurogenesis, is that we can change the brain. It's plastic, it's malleable, so we can change. So I actually completely changed my brain where now I could remember these quotes. Now I could actually be more focused, be more conscious. So it changed my life. And these are the things that I'm like, okay, wait, I made these significant changes in my life. I want to show people how to do it. When you heal, you want to heal other people. And that's really what it comes down to. But yeah, I'd love to do another episode on those pillars because that's transformational. That's what I work with my clients with. So
I love it. Well, let's have you back next week and we will dive into those pillars. So until next week, Brian, thank you so much for being a guest on this show. And as we always ask listeners, if you got value from this episode, please give us a rating and review and feel free to share this with anybody that you feel would get value from this episode. But until then, stay tuned for another episode with Brian and we'll go into all of those 6 pillars that he was sharing. So thanks again, guys.